Welcome to our event on how we raised our first 500K, featuring a couple of Launchpad teams to explain their experiences and talk about opportunities and challenges they faced along the way. I'm Jason Grillo with AirMiners. We've got an interesting show for you today, and what we're going to do for a little bit is to cede the floor to Tito Jankowski, our moderator. Yes, we kind of dialed out our own number today in AirMiners, but that's all good. And then we'll have a discussion for a little bit, then really open the floor to you all so that you can ask your questions of Patty and Felix and Tito as well, to get a better sense of how you yourself could raise money for that first fundraising. Then we'll have a couple of announcements at the very end and go into our networking session after the top of the hour, after we stop the recording. Couple other housekeeping notes. Yes, this is being recorded. It's going to be put on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. One last thing to note, we're here in AirMiners on the journey of removing the first billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And we're so excited to have you joining us for this. To that end, again, that's why we have our events. That's why we have our community. And it's also why we have our Launchpad, which is where Felix and Patty graduated from very recently. And just to note that Launchpad applications are now open for our next batch. It's going to run in early March through mid-April. Applications due February 10th. So if you or someone you know is at an early stage carbon removal startup, I'm going to share the link with you right now for AirMiners Launchpad. If you know of someone who might be a good fit, or maybe you're a good fit yourself, feel free to flip over that application on or before February 10th, this upcoming Friday, and we'll consider for the batch that includes not just coaching with our AirMiners organizing team, but also an investor demo day and a carbon credit buyer demo day, 2 demo days potentially, if we feel you're ready for that. So, and feel free to ask questions along the way in the Zoom chat. I'll be monitoring and feeding them into Tito, Felix, and Patty as we go. I've spoken way too much. Tito, take it away.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you, Patty and Felix. Patty from Seaweed Generation and Felix from In Planet. And to all of you who are out in the chat, Jason says he'll be monitoring, reporting, and verifying the chat. So please drop questions in there. This is meant to be a conversation. So we'll have people hop up for Q&A in about 40 minutes or so. And so, yeah, welcome. We're here to talk about how to raise your first $500,000. You're here with 2 people that have done it, and they've done it recently as well, which is key given the change in the economy. So to kick us off, let's look at, you're building a business. You're trying to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's a new thing. How did you figure out who to raise money from? Patty, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tito. Thank you for having us. So I started out looking into anyone that would talk to me about climate in general, about carbon dioxide removal, and really started getting introductions. So I followed that. I followed the rabbit hole of the introductions and the networking, and eventually hit on a couple people who had loads of other connections. Like, you want to hit those nodes. And they introduced me to most of the people that we ended up raising money from. And I think, it really just kind of snowballed from there. One really, really useful thing that I did just by accident was try to reach out to other people who had founded a carbon dioxide removal company or something in the climate space, and then get introduced to their investors. That helped a lot. And if anyone is watching this who did help me out and introduce me to someone, thank you so much, because you're awesome.
Love it. I love that spontaneous trying different things and seeing what works. Felix, how about you? How did you figure out who to raise money from?
Yeah. Also, thanks for having me. It's great to be part here in the community. And to be honest, at the beginning, it was really chaotic. So at the beginning, we were just joining an accelerator, and there were a lot of companies reaching out. I mean, a lot of VCs were reaching out, also business angels, smaller and larger ones. And we were totally not prepared at the beginning. So they were just trying to get information from us. And then we changed the mode, and we really got prepared. We built a long list of a lot of investors, or also people which are investing in the space, which are kind of really part of the space, and trying to get them somehow in our conversations. And this was really important. I think this is also something I kind of experienced those days. That it's really good to have those investor long list, because still today we closed the round and we're not seeking for money at the moment, but we have like 3 to 5 high potential investors trying to reach out, trying to get in a conversation at the moment per week. And just to give a better understanding if this is now someone we should be kind of really fast and have the conversation tomorrow, or if there's something maybe we can postpone to next week, or we even can just reply an email, we're not interested at all at money for now. This long list helps a lot.
Nice. So getting prepared in terms of your approach, in terms of your outreach, and for both of you, it sounds like reaching out to a lot of different people through your network is really key. Felix, you mentioned being prepared. I want to dig into that. Like, kind of take us on the journey of getting prepared. Kind of breaking it apart, like, how critical was your prototype when you were fundraising? So when you're first going out to talking to investors, how together did you have it in terms of kind of your prototype, your science? How important was that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we're talking about preparation, I think the most important thing was for us not a prototype at all. It was more understanding what kind of investor is fitting at our current stage. And I mean, we're pre-seed. So there are a lot of assumption, there's a lot of energy and also ideas going around. And of course, there's also a growing market, as we all know. And I think the most important was, especially in the first couple of conversations we had with investors, especially in the first call, just to understanding what kind of the key metrics they're looking in. So, I mean, investors are asking a lot. They like to understand how the business is doing, what the general ideas. But you can also turn this around and ask the investor kind of what is his approach, why he's investing in startups before, and what's he also looking into. I think this was even valuable for us just for the first conversation to understand, okay, what's important for them. And prototyping, I mean, I was running a software company before in Planet, and it was really easy to have a click dummy where you can show investors and get them excited. But as you all know, in enhanced rock weathering, there's a lot of science to be done. And I mean, just showing some formulas and some long papers does not make people excited. So I think it's not that important. But having a clear idea about how the product should look like is something which you have to have when you talk to investors.
Can you say a bit more about that? So when you say what the product should look like, what did you have ready at that point?
I mean, especially it's just also being transparent there. Maybe what's the potential? So what's like the huge upsides of enhanced rock weathering, and also especially what kind of the business model we're looking to, then at the end leads to a product. But also being transparent about the risks, because this shows at the end the credibility, and also shows that there are people working on which are not only just promising and putting like, we're going to remove gigatons for less than $100, also really showing that there's a knowledge in the team of the science behind which have to succeed. And where also the critical points are, where maybe the biggest risk to shut the company, but also maybe the point we have to get over to make it to mega or gigaton scale. I think to have this prepared and also can communicate this to an investor really in a short, but also in a short way, but also in a kind of understandable way. I think this is also something we want to talk about later. But some of the investors we are talking to, they'd never heard about enhanced rock weathering. And at the beginning, the first pitches I did, I completely messed up because I was talking about this MRV process and the challenges for monitoring, but they did not know about enhanced rock weathering at all. So this was like, then afterwards, like the first learning I had was just asking them, okay, did you ever heard about carbon removal and enhanced rock weathering in carbon removal? And some of them said yes, but you could quickly understand that they really know partially about it. And if you then continue the conversation, it never will be good, because they don't understand what you're talking about.
Nice, I love it. So what I'm hearing there is one piece that's standing out that we're going to come back to later, though, is this idea of, you know, getting prepared means in those conversations, like aligning and understanding, you know, what's the investor looking for, what other companies are they looking at investing in, and really kind of, and what's their knowledge of carbon removal. Patty, how about you? What was your experience like here in terms of how key was your prototype at the seed stage?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I really agree with what Felix is saying there. Like, we didn't have a prototype to show, but we had a very clear idea of exactly what it would look like, what its capacity would be, how much carbon dioxide it could potentially remove, what like the upper ceiling would be in terms of the opportunity there. You know, like a drawing or a diagram or a product sketch goes a really long way. It kind of demonstrates what your tech is, exactly what it's going to do, what the flow of the like different parts involved is going to be, and then all the different things that you need to kind of figure out and where you see it going was really important as well. So kind of we ended up starting really big with the opportunity, and we probably should have done a bit more like what exactly is a carbon dioxide removal, like what does that mean, because I don't know if we ever got to the point where that was like incredibly clear to everyone. I think people either already knew about it or they just assumed it was kind of just something to do with carbon credits, and then we ended up walking through like the opportunity, the prototype, our solution to it, and then where we saw it going in the future and how that could scale. And then we did a bit of high level like OPEX, CAPEX kind of projections about what our plans would be like, you know, should everything work out perfectly, where we would get to with everything. But yeah, I think like having a plan was pretty important.
Yeah, and start with the investors you don't like, so just get trained.
Yes. yeah, get some practice questions in.
I mean, be prepared mean also maybe that you kind of have a list of the investors you might not take the money from, but I would rather less talk to them, just get started to get some questions from them. And I think like having 15 or 20 conversations, I would say 80% are always the same. The questions are 80% the same and maximum 20% varies. And this can kind of give a good training to start.
Wow, great awareness. Patty, I'm hearing 80% of the questions are the same. How's that align with kind of your experience too at that early stage?
Yeah, maybe even higher. Like you get to a point where we got to a point with it where if someone asked a completely original question, it was like, whoa, good job. And then that's a great question. Well done. Yeah. But I mean, all the questions that people ask are super reasonable, you know, like they tend to form like into a couple of buckets, like risks, money, what could other like adverse things happen, like what other things could happen, and then like what don't you really understand about your approach, like what do you need to go and figure out. Yeah, the stuff that investors are worried about is like typically pretty reasonable. They're a smart bunch. So,
and just to land it with, when you started out pre having these 20 first conversations, were you ready for all those questions, or was it something that you kind of built out through those first conversations? Felix, I'm curious kind of where you started and kind of where you ended up after those first 20 calls.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to have an answer to any of those questions, but I think sometimes it's better just not to answer, or just to be transparent and saying that that's nothing we can answer today, and then maybe be prepared on this next time. Because I think especially early stage investors, they really like to build trust with the founders. We have on our cap table also some serial entrepreneurs, and they know what's going on. So they know that you don't have an answer to all the questions at the moment. And I think for them, it's rather more important to build the relationship, and the relationship is always built on trust, than having someone who's bullshitting just to avoid that maybe he got catched on a question he could not answer. But I mean, in general, to the most important questions, like to the founder team, to the technology, to the risks, to the market, it's always important to prepare on that. But this should not happen with investors or investor calls. I think this can happen in accelerators, with peers, with other startups, with mentors. Yeah, just making sure you have the good answers for the important questions.
Nice. Patty, how about you? Do you have any memories of a question that kind of you were kind of not prepared for, and you're like, hey, actually, like, kind of had a different reaction to it?
Like, we had so many questions that we didn't know the answer to.
Like what?
Well, you know, like, how exactly are you going to do like each of these different pieces of the puzzle? And like, and especially in like follow-up meetings, like usually the first couple meetings, you'd go over your pitch, you talk about high level, what was going on. And then when you start like really digging in, people would, or investors would want to see, what does this look like 7, 8, 9, 10 years out? How quickly is it going to grow? How quickly can you get to this point? Like, how many people are you going to hire in the next 5 years? Like the questions can keep rolling. And, just like Felix says, like at some point you have to say sort of, you know what, I don't know the answer to that right now. Let me go away, think about it, and I'll get back to you with an answer. And, I need to dig in and do some research there. And then I think with carbon dioxide removals and this market that's really kind of forming right now, a lot of the questions that investors will ask, none of us know the answer to quite yet. That's like we have this like huge, like massive potential in the future, but right this moment, like we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the next sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years of it. We know what needs to happen, but we don't know for sure that it's going to. So I think being honest about that was like pretty important.
I think if there's an investor who wants to see a business plan for the next 5 years, and he likes to be kind of is really precise on numbers, like in the 3rd or 4th years, I would not kind of take the money from him. Because this is just a waste of time. I think it's important to raise awareness in a pre-seed phase or in a seed phase. So of course there must be a plan, but a lot of stuff is still uncertain, and it's kind of wasting the time if you go into too much details on numbers. You're going to change for sure again.
Yeah, let's talk about that a bit. Like in these early conversations, like qualifying people and getting a fit for whether they're a fit. Can you talk more about that? Both of you, but Felix, you're already there. Like, yeah, when does that come up? When it sounds like you're, in a sense, you're getting a sense from somebody asking a lot of questions. Like, actually, this is maybe not a good fit for you, or it's, this isn't gonna be an investment.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is important to realize that those people were kind of influenced for a long time. I mean, as a founder or as a CEO, you start like being the boss in the company from the beginning, and the only people who kind of asking you some questions and you have to be kind of answering them are those investors. And this can be really powerful and helpful. So if you have investors and people on the cap table which are challenging you and asking you the right questions, they will push you in that direction. Or on the other side, if they ask you the wrong questions or they bother you with stuff which is not important, this can also, of course, slow you down and bring your mindset in a completely wrong direction. So I think it's important to have the right people on board. And besides the mindset and the right questions they should ask, I think also from their expertise, we try to kind of have it comparable. So we have someone which is really knowledge in the carbon removal space itself. That was kind of the first investor we got. Then we had an impact accelerator VC, which is kind of having a huge network, which is providing a lot of contacts. Also kind of really putting this carbon removal and impact in a general level. And then afterwards, after we had those 2 days, there were also more investors joining, which were not so knowledgeable about carbon removal itself. They were more from the food industry or from sustainable investing in general. And they were also not digging too much into details because they understood, okay, they're 2 experts really understanding the technology. And we understand it from a founding perspective. So we know, okay, it has huge potential. There's a huge market. It's a great team there. And then they put money on top. And I think this is a cool in a good way, and really thankful that in the end we could end up with this cap table.
So to play it back a bit, it sounds like getting the right investors on as your first investor was really catalytic for bringing on these other investors that would then be able to not necessarily lead on the expertise, but would be able to kind of get the rest of it and still be good investors.
Yeah, totally.
Patty, how about for you? What was your experience like around this, getting this feel for investors being a fit or not a fit? It's just something I want to I want to bring to, from talking with a lot of early teams, my own experience. There is kind of at times this pull of like, oh, I really want to get this person on board. I really want to get this person to say yes, but then maybe they kind of suck. Like, what's your experience like with that? Where you're like, actually, maybe you need to say no to that.
I think for us, the selection process was almost self-selecting. So we had the people who came in and the people that are investors and like we love they were confident about what we're doing. They were quick to the post. They came forward. They said they were committed. They followed through on it. And then the ones that didn't come in, we didn't say no to them, but they just, they continued dithering. And you sort of, if someone's going to dither about things, let them dither. Like, you don't need to, I don't need to like to stress about it too much. Like, if someone's convinced and they're going to be there and they're like gunning for you, they're going to support you, they're doing their thing, then they're going to come in, they're going to commit. And if they're asking loads of questions and you're kind of 2 weeks into a process, just, just let it go. Like, come back next time maybe, or just, you can politely say, hey, we're kind of done now, but like, we'll chat to you guys soon. I don't know if we ever like very consciously said absolutely not. We just didn't push certain people forwards.
Got it. So you're running that balance all the time. I want to talk a bit about, we've talked about kind of your preparation. I want to go back to that a bit more too. So talk about, like, in terms of, you talk about business model, what kind of level of conversations with potential customers were you having? Like, how important was your conversations with buyers or customers as you were raising that those first couple checks? Patty, maybe you can take that one.
Yeah, sure. We were very early in conversations with a few different players at that time, and really, we didn't have LOIs. We were just, kind of, we know this market is coming. We know these people are coming into this market. Here are some examples of huge players, and here is what we know it can look like. I think understanding and giving an explanation of, broadly speaking, what the market is starting to do was at that point enough at sort of the pre-seed stage. But what we did really need to get right was like the story around what we're doing and why this approach makes sense and what our technology is and what it's going to do. That felt more important than having very early customers at pre-seed seed stage. I think at seed stage, that will be an entirely different story.
Yeah.
Felix, how about you? What'd you see?
Yeah, I think at the end, it's again paying into the trust. So, if investors in a pre-seed or seed stage, they can just believe in a lot of things, especially in the carbon removal market. So many things are just changing, and so many things are just going to happen in the future. So I think it's a lot about believing. And if you, of course, have some customer traction, it's easier to believe that it is going to pay off because there's initially one sale or something like that. So I think having it is great. We also had a small first customer, but it was a really small one, and he was not kind of really famous for buying in the carbon removal area. But it was just good to drop this name. So I had a feeling investors were asking it if you have some first customers. We said yes, and we dropped the name, and there was kind of like a check mark on the box, and that's it. If we did not maybe have an first buyer, maybe they would then dig into this topic even deeper and say, okay, why not? And then maybe it would start a conversation in the wrong direction. Yeah, but I think every way we can kind of provide trust, that that they can believe it's going to happen, it's going to be big, it's good.
Can you give a rough ballpark of that that first customer? Are we talking like $100, $100,000, $1 million? Like
5,000.
Got it.
5,
nice. So that checked the box.
Yeah. In our case, it checked. Yeah.
That's great. How did that? I do want to dig a bit more into the buyer bit. Where'd that person come from? Like, how did you get to the point where you have this pre-seed company, you've got this business model, you've got this vision, and you've landed a customer? Like, how did that come about?
You mean how we ended up with the first customer?
Yeah.
It was someone from our network. So he was kind of interested in the area of carbon offsets in general, and we were kind of teaching him that offsetting carbon is kind of a tricky thing. It's not only just buying online some CO2 certificates that can go in the wrong direction. And then he was really interested in buying carbon removals. And it's a large company, and they just provided really a small amount, so they just compensate their flights with us. So they had a lot of more CO2 at the moment, which they're trying to avoid, and then partially also to offset. But we kind of agreed, okay, how about starting with your flights? Yeah, and that's how we ended up. So they knew us before, they trusted us before already, because they knew us personally, and then they were okay. Let's do it and try it out together.
Yeah, I love it. Sounds like that person I saw a question in the chat around like champions, and so that person sounds like they were very much a champion at that early stage. Patty, do you have any examples of kind of champions at that early stage, like somebody that was in your network, somebody that wasn't necessarily an investor, but somebody that, they introduced you, or they did something that just kind of was really catalytic at that early stage towards getting you then to that came up in your pitch for funding?
Well, I was going to say you, Tito, but that was after we had done our pre-seed. Yeah, we had loads of catalytic people. Mostly they were advisors, mentors, folks who introduced us, like I would say more mavens, who were introducing us to loads of other people. And then we were lucky enough through mostly our networks to get a lot of like smaller early investors. So we didn't have early customers, but we had a bunch of angels when we first started talking to the larger VC firms, which went a really long way to kind of put the line in the sand about the terms of the agreement, about what we were kind of going for, and how much we were raising, because we came into the conversations with a bit of backing already. And that was really, really helpful.
I'm hearing this. There's this momentum for both of you in your early fundraising, where for you, Patty, it was raising small checks from angels. For you, Felix, it was picking the right first investor who could kind of catalyze that expertise. Then you kind of build up from there. Yeah, sure, totally. I mean, we kind of planned to raise 450,000 euros, and we got this amount with the first 2 investors, and then we kind of officially were closing the round, and then more people were joining, and then so many investors get super excited because they thought, okay, maybe we're going to miss something now here, and at the end we ended up with 1.2 million, and we could even raise more money. And I think this shows this momentum. If there's initially some people really believing in it, and then getting excited, and then people really want just to jump on the train, and they also understand you're not going to wait for them. So either they join or they don't. And this in the end also gives kind of a strong position to the valuation you can ask for. So we increased the valuation a lot by only 3 or 4 months after we had our first check signed. We were kind of starting to increase the valuation. Which was great for the first investors because they had upside already in just a couple of months, and the others, they would totally understand because they knew, okay, we don't like to get diluted too much as founders as well. So I think creating this momentum and then keeping it is something really good. Nice. I wanted to get, so I heard, so just first two investors around a couple $100,000, also the first customer on a couple $1,000s. Patty, what was that like? You mentioned the angels. I just want to go back to that. what was the first angel check that you got? Like, again, like real rough if it's fine, but like.
Our first angel check was 25K from like a really good friend of mine who does angel investing and really liked the idea, and that was enough to get things started. And I think we went up to around sort of 80-90 before we started pitching to VCs. So like somewhere around that kind of 100K mark was really helpful to kick off with.
Yeah. I saw a question earlier around safes. Were you using like safe kind of investment structures at this point?
Yeah,
we were. Yeah,
that's kind of more of a yes, no, yeah. So yes, safes are good. Let's see. Dig back into the questions. So we've talked about how much you raised, how you approached it. How about when you think about carbon removal, it's one of these things that there's kind of this competitive landscape emerging. How did that come up in your early pitches? Like you see somebody else doing something that's similar, or an investor asks you about something similar. Did that come up in your early fundraising, and kind of how did it come up, and like what became of it? Felix, I think you had a story here.
Yeah. I mean, enhanced rock weathering, for example, what we're in, there are kind of maybe a handful of companies which got money now, maybe a little more or less, I don't know. There's so many coming at the moment, and this is super exciting. I think what's really important there also for our investors was interesting to see that there have been investments already from really serious investors in that field. So I think it can be also sometimes a good thing if you do something similar to other companies, because especially in this carbon removal market, a lot of uncertainties there. Also kind of not experts in the carbon removal area, like investors which don't know that much. They just see, for example, how our I don't call them competitors because we're really collaborating at the moment a lot in enhanced rock weathering, but kind of at the end, we all have the aim to sequester carbon with enhanced rock weathering. And the investors saw they're really serious investors in this field, and this gives them, again, a lot of trust. And if then at the end you can prove that you're kind of doing the same, but maybe in a different approach, so there are some things are different, which you might make you even more successful, then they're super happy. Yeah.
So it sounds like these other companies doing something that you could talk about. You could reference, hey, this investor is investing in this area already. You can invest with us in this area too. Patty, how about you? What did you see out there?
Maybe one comment or one thought. I mean, they will always ask, and this question is always coming. So what's your difference? How are you different? What's your USP compared to them? And I think you have to have an answer there, but really also talking to them and showing them or checking them with them, the investors other companies got already, is then kind of turning it around and making it to a positive thing. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Figure out how to own it and turn it into something that's positive. Patty, how about you?
Yeah, we absolutely had the similar experience. I mean, going out there and doing something completely unique is probably really hard when you're like the first mover, or like the very, very first mover. But being able to point to, like Felix said, companies that had been backed by well-known investors, were getting traction in the market, we're doing something that was similar but different enough for us to be able to differentiate, was really, really helpful. And the best conversations that we had were always with investors who had either seen enough competitive offerings but were able to see this sort of specific like upsides of what we are doing as a differentiator, but had been kind of, I'd say, almost tenderized by, seeing a lot of other opportunities and maybe missing out on some of them, maybe passing on some of the others. That was really, really helpful. But like Felix said, you do want to have some sort of differentiator as well, so like be doing something slightly differently, and in that way an investor's going to want to hear why you're better. But it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to be like absolutely the best at everything and, you know, kind of beat everyone else on every single dimension, but they'll want to see something that means that you are slightly different from those other offerings and able to, you know, maybe it could be your team, it could be your tech, it could be with the way that you're going to approach the market, but they'll want to see something that, you know, a hypothesis that you have that's slightly different about the world.
Right. So it can be a strategic advantage if you lean into it and you answer it, and you also figure out like, yeah, here's how we're different. So we've kind of walked this path around, you know, building out your network, building out your process, getting questions, figuring out how to answer the questions and come up with new ones. What was kind of the end-to-end process like in terms of time? Like what was the timeline? How many months from kind of first pitch to first check? Just for there. And we can talk about closing after that, but kind of, yeah, what did it take to get to that? Since that first check was really catalytic, what was that timeline like?
I think the until we signed took quite a while. I think we started somewhere in July and we signed the first check in October. But we kind of get the commitment from people already in August or something like that. And then it took a long time. They went on vacation. Then we had to make the due diligence. Then we had to put up the contracts. And I mean, we were working with safes only. So with convertible loans, something similar like safes. And still it took a lot of time. So 4 months, something like that, 4 to 5 months.
Patty, how about you?
Ours was a bit different. So, I mean, the first one to first check was maybe like a couple weeks. And that's, I think, one of the really great things about safes is that you can kind of, if you want to take money quickly from smaller angels, then like that's very possible. For the larger checks, it was about 3 months. So sort of beginning of May to June, which in hindsight was actually pretty quick, but at the time it did not feel very quick at all.
Yeah, you were kind of first hitting where the economy started to shift. And it sounds like, Felix, you were kind of when people had settled into like, hey, we actually are being pretty cautious now.
Yeah. And it's also just, I think it varies between the first check, like the first conversation to the first check, and then the others, they go way more faster because the others then know, okay, this contract has been signed by someone else, they checked it. So I don't have to make this whole process maybe so much in detail. Of course, I also like to make sure and have everything a look at, but the first one took like the 3 to 4 months, something like that. And the last one was just one night. I cannot tell who, but the last investor, he was kind of reaching out. We were a long conversation already. And I told him that we now kind of finally closed the round and he was, okay, can I maybe join? And then I was sending in the evening the convertible loan agreement. The next day in the morning, he signed it already. Yeah.
So just to do the math, so the first one took 4 months, so it's called 120 days. And then the last one took 1 day. So there is this like, that's what momentum is, right? There's this compression. Yeah. I want to reflect on, so both of you are here because you want to support other people to be in this with you. You've gotten advice from other people as you were starting out and you want to give some of that back. If you think about your younger self, what advice would you have for your past self doing this? Kind of at that at the stage where you're about to go talk to your first investor, not the person that gives you the first check, maybe, but like you're about to go talk to that first investor. What would you say back to that person?
Shall I?
And I can do a mock phone call with the person in the past. Hey, this is Patty. This is Patty, May
hey,
2022. Yo, what's up?
What's up? Oh wow, I would have a lot of advice for her. I think the first thing I would say is like sit down and like figure out what your differentiators are and then build out your story around that and what your approach is going to be. Get an advisor. Like, definitely try and find someone who's done fundraising before, or is, you know, in a community where you're able to access somebody who's done it recently, so they can give you like the shakedown of what a deck should have in it, what type of points you want to be hitting. And then, you know, I'd say to her, have a look at what I've done and figure out a way of being slightly different, and then go for it. And like, go out there and say why you're better and what you're going to do that's like faster or like more efficient than what other people are already doing.
I love it. If you just go a little bit further with that, is there something you learned about yourself in this process, in that change that's happened around like, yeah, like what does that mean for Patty May 2022 to like, yeah, get an advisor and figure out your differentiation?
I mean, I think the best thing that you can do is go and get as much feedback as you can in conversations that aren't going to result in a no that you don't want to get, right? Like, you gotta go out there and get tenderized, and like just don't like just take feedback and go, oh, take feedback and go, oh yeah, thanks, that's going to make me a little bit better tomorrow. And the more people that you can speak to that are going to give you candid feedback, honestly, the better you're going to be. And like, that was a real learning curve for me.
I love it. I know what you mean. Brutal. Wow.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I can take a bit more now, but like it still hurts. You know?
Love it. Well, nice talking to you, Patty. This is May 2022, Patty. Let me call up Felix. Hey, Felix, this is July 2022, Felix. Hello.
Hey, what's up?
What do you got for me?
I think my biggest learning is that although maybe the market is changing, also those days the market changed a lot. There are thousands of investors still out there with full pockets. And I think sometimes also myself, I have this feeling there's an investor or there's someone reaching in and you really want to make this deal. I think, okay, this is the investor. You had a really first good conversation and you get kind of getting nervous about it, that you really want to get them into the company. And I think this is good. Of course, having this kind of deal feeling and trying to close the deal. But sometimes I think if we founders wanted too much. And this is also then relating, or the investors also have a feeling for that. And just raising the awareness of there are thousands of investors. I was joining an accelerator and they kind of give us the task to build a long list of 1,000 investors. And at the beginning I was, okay, well, this is kind of waste of time. There are no 1,000 investors out there. And I was completely wrong. There are. And this just gives me more freedom. Of course, we want to get these investors, we will make the deals, but there's so many investors and they will always invest in companies. And if something is not happening or it's not kind of a good fit, and I think this is also something you should truly ask yourself if you want to work with those persons, and if not, it's also okay not to take the money.
With this list of 1,000 people, how'd you build that?
How I filled it?
How'd you fill up 1,000 people to go imagine as investors?
Yeah, there are good lists out there. Like Crunchbase, for example, is providing a lot of resources, and there are also more lists. I can share them afterwards, but there's resource out there, and yeah, I mean, if you have a lot of time, you could even fill up with 5,000 investors. I mean, 1,000 investors, not all are carbon removal. But if you look, like the most carbon removal companies also have some co-benefits. We do, for example, have in agriculture. And if you look to companies investing in agriculture and food, then you easily get up with 1,000 investors. Yeah, it's unbelievable, but it's so many. Yeah, and although the market is changing a lot, I have the feeling that still in carbon removal, good companies still also can raise easily money. Not easily, but can raise money. Let's put it like that.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for going there, Felix. February 2023. That's really helpful to know that list is valuable, and that confidence of finding the right investors and that there are lots of investors is really powerful. Thank you both for going there on this, for sharing this perspective of where you're at in the cutting edge. Because look, you're you've done this in the last couple of months, less than a year. You've both gone from not fundraising to fundraising. So we're going to switch over to Q&A. Sounds like Jason has some people queued up. And I know we also have another Launchpad graduate in the crowd that we'll bring up in a bit. Eric Matzer is going to he's got some perspective to add to this, as well as somebody that's going out and fundraise. So let's see, Jason, is this, you sent me this list. I think we've got OTC Chuck. Are they still here? I guess it's OT Chuck.
Want to unmute and ask?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Okay. Yeah, a couple questions. I've been looking for funding for a while. I used to be in it 20 years ago with a large corporation, and selecting out and sitting in on presentations by hopeful companies. And a couple comments is the way that they call it the big five investment bankers in New York would treat it is any financial projections you had that was past 12 months was just, you're smoking something because they weren't necessarily accurate at all. So they only looked at what you were going to do financially with the next 12 months for them. But then more recently, what I've been hitting on is people that make us offers, but they basically want to take over the company. They want to take it, they want to buy it, or they want to invest in it for pennies and then sell it off for dollars. It's the old, flipping game. And they aren't interested in what the technology is or anything. How do you avoid those type of investors?
I never experienced that, luckily. But I think what you're saying is that you like to avoid that investors come in and want to sell pretty high pretty soon, right? They just want to valuation pretty fast and then sell again.
Exactly. They want to come in, they want to invest now, and they want to, get a 40 times return within a year on their money by selling off the stock or whatever that they got in your company. And they're just into it for the money. And I've hit on a lot of these that, they're chomping at the bit to get a hold of the company. But, we're not going to let them do that because we have a purpose, a mission, whatever you want to call it, to go forward with the technology.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, I think all investors, they have an expectation to get a multiple on their investment back. I mean, this is part of the game. And I think as earlier they come in, as higher this multiple should be. So I think this should be clear. If at the beginning you take money from any angel investors or VCs, the expectations is that they can, in general, sell their shares again in the future. And to avoid that, you kind of have the right vibes maybe at the beginning. Someone who wants to push really early, really soon to an exit, I would just suggest to look into other investments they made and talk to some reference companies. So then how they're doing.
Okay. Well, by definition, that's what an angel investor does, is he comes in and helps get you going. And in the process of you becoming successful, they make a lot of money, and that's fine. That's the name of the game. What do you offer for your initial? Let's say, Patty, you had the first 25,000, and Felix, you had first investor was like 5,000. What are you offering them in exchange for that money? Is it X amount of stock shares or?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So with a safe or the equivalent in whatever country we're all in, you put a cap on the valuation that they will convert at, and they'll purchase or they pre-purchase shares in the company that will convert later on. Mm-hmm. And you can offer a discount on that. Usually it will convert when you raise a larger round, and they would get a discount. They could get a discount on whatever that round is, but the valuation or the cap is really like the main thing that they would then convert at, and then they get that equivalent amount of the company. But it sounds like you're maybe talking to people who aren't necessarily like in the normal VC area. Like an angel investor would definitely expect a massive return on their investment, but usually that term, like the length of investment is a long time. Like they shouldn't expect to get their money back anytime soon.
Agreed.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Next up, we're going to go to Makoto, and then I think Eric Matzner had a question, and then Ben Swanbeck, and then Thomas Morgan. We have 8 minutes to get all through all this. So,
all right.
Makoto, you had a really interesting question. I thought about the kind of chicken and the egg of prototype and buyer.
Yeah. Thanks for calling out, and thanks for the panel discussion. This was really interesting stuff, Felix and Patty. My questions regarding essentially that first customer that you talked about, Felix. So both of you had mentioned that when you were raising capital, you didn't quite have a prototype per se, right? So, in terms of gaining that traction with customers, how do you get that first check from a customer as revenue prior to having tech, right? That sounds like that's essentially a pre-sale.
Patty, you would like to go first, or you have a good answer?
I mean, pre-sales are most of carbon dioxide removal at the current point in time. So I think that's kind of, whilst most companies that have kind of raised money do have their prototypes and they have them up and running and that kind of stuff, like the vast majority of carbon dioxide removal is still yet to be delivered and has been purchased beforehand. I think as far as prototyping goes, what you want to really do in this industry, or my understanding of this industry, is have a really solid handle on the science of what's going to happen when you start to do your approach of carbon dioxide removal. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to demonstrate the entire thing, but you need to know how much you're going to be removing and how exactly that is going to work. And that is, I think, more important for an approach than having the full working prototype, because that costs money and investors won't necessarily expect you to have everything working before you've raised any money to be able to actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, you can also take the risk. I mean, what we did for our first sale, we kind of also made a pre-sales of the 5,000 euros. We just gave a guarantee that we're going to pay the money back if we don't succeed. Yeah.
Sorry, I know that we don't have a ton of time. Was there like a template or a structure that you guys used in order to manage that contract for the pre-sale?
You mean a template for the pre-sale?
That's right.
Actually,
next question.
Actually, that's the next event, and I'm going to share a link to that soon, where we're going to have a law firm called Wilson Sonsini sponsor the event and talk about contracting in CDR. Beautiful. So yeah.
In that case, thank you both.
Yeah, sorry, Makoto, sorry to cut you off, but I do want to get to Eric's question. Question and insight.
Hey, yeah, it was just a great panel and everything. I just want to drop in some info from what some people had asked in talking to investors. I pasted in some of our questions to them because generally there's climate investors, carbon removal investors, and then investors who maybe understand your specific technology. So one way to kind of flip the script on them is to put them on the question and answer part early in your conversation, so you make sure you don't waste your time. And then if the investor's not a fit, it puts you in a much better position to say, hey, do you know investors who are a fit? And then instead of getting a pass as like a negative signal, you can kind of cut that off completely and then get to somebody who could be a great connector or who's more relevant for investing. Yeah, and on the last question about prototypes, I think it's a great idea to go into something like AirMiners so that you can demonstrate your prototype, and it kind of gives you a structure within AirMiners where you do look at TEA, you do look at sort of all these questions that the investors are going to ask. And then I think if you don't know the answer to all of the frontier criteria or the carbon removal X Prize criteria, you're not really ready to start raising. So check out those criteria and build your technologies to answer those scalability questions, the price questions, and sort of make sure you have answers for those. If you don't have answers, investors are checking if you're bullshitting or not a lot. And so just say, I don't know, or I can get back to you, as I think Patricia mentioned. Another thing, following up briefly on what Patricia mentioned about first investors, generally, if you can find some people you've met in person, go to New York Climate Week, go to some of these events. If you can travel for a specific event, getting a in-person meeting, like for example, I went to COP in the UK and we met somebody there who ended up being one of our first investors. So we met somebody who introduced us to that person. It was their first investor. So there are angels that like to be first investors, and getting them. And I think, as Patty said, or maybe Felix too, having like those first investors in makes it a lot easier to close the other investors. And you can kind of put those groups against each other, with each other, to kind of help drive and say, hey, well, I need you to sign so I can close these larger investors. You can use the large investors to close the small investors, and then the small investors help you close the large investors. It's a bit of a own chicken or egg there.
Thanks, Eric. Swiss Williamson, you had a really, just real quick in the last minute here, you had a question about dilutive versus non-dilutive and philanthropic.
I believe that question was somebody else.
Oh, sorry, that was Thomas Morgan, sorry. Thomas? Oh, sorry. To paraphrase, had a question about non-dilutive or philanthropic funding. Did you try that first, or were you doing it simultaneously?
Simultaneously. I mean, actually, Felix, you're in the EU, right? So your government situation with funding is probably similar but slightly different. In the UK, there's a lot of different funding calls that you can go for, and we raised money before we got grant funding, but we got some grant funding afterwards. But they're all different sources that take a lot of work, regardless of which one you go for.
Yeah, I think grant can take a long time. So I think the small grants go really fast, but the bigger grant, I think there's a grant out there we're going to apply now. It's like 2.5 million. It just take like, I don't know, 6 to 9 months.
Great. Last question. Now we get to Swiss's question about how you handle maybes.
Maybes?
An example of response from an investor, and let's kick the wheels. Did you add an email follow-up or ask more questions, or just let them go?
I would just let him go and then inform him that if it's a maybe, they're not sure. And if you push them or if you pressure them, they're not going to say yes. But if you wait until you have the round, and then you maybe can get him to overscribe you.
Yep, I agree with that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. If you didn't have a chance to ask your question, then I added Patty and Felix's and Tina's emails to the chat. I alluded to the event we're going to have in about a week and a half with, like I said, sponsored by Wilson Sonsini, Silicon, talking about contracting for carbon removal credits. And it looks like it should be a really interesting topic that I hope you all can appreciate and enjoy. With that, I'm going to say, once again, thank you. And just one last reminder, Eric alluded to it, and also Patty and Felix are alumni of as is Eric, of the investor of our AirMiners Launchpad program. So like I said, if you want to undertake aspects of how to pitch, how to understand the fundraising landscape, how to understand carbon markets, I'll let the alumni speak for themselves, but we've heard, for the most part, that this is an excellent way of getting a start on understanding these aspects of your carbon removal startup. Thanks once again, and looking forward to seeing you at our next event.